Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are advised that the following program may contain images and voices of people who have died. This episode contains references to domestic abuse, gender dysphoria, and suicide. The idea that women work is pretty accepted now, thanks to trailblazing Aussies. But when it comes to gender equity, Australia ranks behind other countries because our workforce is highly gender segregated, which means our industries are divided into men's work and women's work. The last census found Australia's most popular jobs are skewed by over 75% towards one gender. We see more women in caring roles like teaching and nursing, rather than engineering and science.
And you're right, there is a significant amount of gender segregation in the Australian labour force. On many measures, actually, the Australian labour force is among the highest in terms of gender segregation in the OECD.
And the pay gap between pink and blue jobs stands at $3 per hour. But men and women are different, right? So naturally they'd have different jobs. A 2018 study of 15-year-olds found that Australian boys outperform their female classmates in maths by 6 points.
However, a huge body of research shows that both boys and girls start school with the same aptitude for science and mathematics. Somehow, by the time these kids get to university and graduate, 4 out of 5 STEM graduates are male.
So, if it's not all about natural ability, why are women far less likely to pursue men's work?
The system is stacked against women.
Fear of destitution was the number one reason.
What should a woman be digging for? Poverty?
The expectations on women.
Gender-based commentary actually has a very chilling effect on women's confidence. We sell our young women short.
The story in Australia begins a long time ago. Over the past decade, new archaeological evidence has found that sex equality was fundamental to ancient hunter-gatherers. It was only after the agricultural revolution, when societies could accumulate resources for the first time, that gender inequality became the common thread between civilizations. But there were exceptions.
There's been a lot of analysis of how in traditional Aboriginal communities, women collected 80% of the food and had a lot of economic power as well as a lot of social and cultural and spiritual power. When Australia was colonised, it brought in a culture where women were inferior and they had no economic power.
But while this proves that gender roles are socially constructed, the British believed them to be biological. It was seemingly natural then for men to work and get paid, while women raised children. So men were employed in professions which have driven our economy until recently. And while women stepped into men's jobs out of necessity during World War II,
Isn't this pretty hot for you, Miss Spillane?
Well, I hear it gets kind of hot around the kitchen stove, too.
the backlash was swift.
What happened in the 1950s after World War II, like when the whole world was horribly traumatised, women were essentially gaslit to believe that their place was in the home and that to have ambition was unladylike.
But women knew differently. The next decades ushered in a new era of liberation, which coincided with enormous economic change.
So in addition to major shifts in educational achievement by women and contraception, which has allowed them to control the number of children they have and therefore participate in the labour market more than before, there's been a huge explosion of jobs in the area that we think of as women's work.
Basically, women won the right to work, but most went into new, non-industrious jobs, and almost nothing about that has changed in the past 20 years. The number of women in male-dominated fields hasn't really increased, and the flow-on effects of this are major.
Men have been able to keep the wages higher in their industries on the assumption that it's men's work and it's valuable for the economy. The opposite has happened for women.
There's a stereotype that men are better at dealing with money than women are. And this is a really dangerous myth because there's no truth to the idea that men are just naturally, biologically better at dealing with money.
So how do these systemic biases shape the life of a young girl growing up in Australia today? The socialisation of women starts before they're born, through the colours of their room and their clothes, to even the types of toys bought for them.
Little boys will be given Lego and girls will be given Barbie dolls, and not necessarily Lego as well, which can help with the maths and the physics and the engineering behind it. And it doesn't limit your creativity.
On the flip side, you know, a lot of young girl children are given like cookware sets and baby dolls, and we actually disadvantage everyone. I mean, everyone needs spatial awareness skills. Everyone needs to be able to cook for themselves. And that is particularly acute for transgender young people, because not only are you being put into a box, but you're being put into the wrong box.
By the time a girl is 5, she probably knows what things are meant for girls compared to boys, especially once she starts school.
So commonly what happens when you don't have a trained science or maths teacher, another teacher then has to step in to teach those subjects.
Out-of-field teaching can be very challenging and can impact a teacher's confidence.
A teacher's maths anxiety is often transferred to female students who already have fewer role models in STEM and experience bias at school.
Research, for example, shows the way maths teachers behave towards male and female students is different, and that influences how the female students end up feeling about those subjects.
So, she learns what subject she's meant to like, which is reinforced by her mum.
It is amazing the number of times I have heard a mother say, "I was never good at maths."
I think they hear that in the background and sometimes they take that on.
Basically, STEM anxiety is a cycle that perpetuates itself. Because boys are less likely to get negative reinforcement about maths and science, they're more likely to put up their hand in the classroom. And this isn't just backed up by countless studies, it's plain to see.
I did a little tally over a few lessons just to see if this was real or not, and certainly the numbers I got come back to say that the boys were asking many more questions.
Young girls are just as capable at STEM subjects as young boys are.
But they already, by the time they're about 6 years old, doubt their ability. A worldwide study of students in member countries of the OECD found that girls are plagued with greater anxiety towards maths and science than boys, even when they perform just as well. All of this means that a girl will probably invest less time in STEM than a boy will. So, a gender gap in maths and science performance opens by the time she's 8 years old. For this girl, the freedom to choose her career path is limited, and for our world, the ramifications are huge. Globally, just 22% of jobs in artificial intelligence are occupied by women, which exponentially increases the risk of gender bias, getting reinscribed by tech.
When Samsung's Bixby came out, if you asked Bixby in the female voice, "Talk dirty to me, Bixby," she would respond in a honeyed tone, "Oh, I don't want to be on Santa's naughty list." But when you asked the male-voiced Bixby about talking dirty, he'd respond with a story about soil erosion.
We have the centre of power for the technology industry in Silicon Valley being dominated by misogynistic bros.
Tech biases not only perpetuate stereotypes, they also make women less safe.
It wasn't until not that long ago that crash test dummies were modelled on a young teenage boy. I guess by that disregarding of female physiology, it makes our women more unsafe.
So much of the world is designed and geared for men. Take, for example, COVID-19. The masks are designed for men, which means they don't fit the female faces.
And a tracking app designed by male technicians for the purpose of workplace surveillance has actually been used by domestic abusers to coerce and control their partners.
It just shows you when you have people who are in charge who don't necessarily imagine that that's what's going on in society, then they can't safeguard their products against being misused.
In fact, the liberties of women are more broadly constrained by yet another impact of the school STEM gap.
So the math anxiety that young girls learn at school later translates to an anxiety towards money management. because they feel that money management is all about being good at mathematics.
And these negative money beliefs get fostered at home too.
Our son was following his father's example, doing a lot of the outdoor jobs as well as the indoor jobs, and we had subconsciously valued those jobs at a higher rate. Therefore, our daughter was earning less for doing the cooking than our son was earning for taking the rubbish out. And I'm really ashamed to admit that, but we internalise a lot of this stuff and it becomes unconscious bias.
Because blue jobs are associated with men and greater pay, even progressive parents like Tracy can unconsciously perpetuate the pocket money pay gap. And it's more widespread than you'd think. Studies have found that on average girls get 25% less pocket money than boys in Australia, so they grow up to believe they're not good with money, which can be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Men are more likely to invest than women. So surveys have shown that around 70% of men say they're confident in making investments, and it's only around 50% of women.
And that's a problem because women over 55 are the fastest growing cohort of homeless Australians. So how can we build girls' and women's confidence in maths and money? In 2020, the federal government slashed the cost of maths and agricultural degrees by 61%. But they also hiked the prices of popular courses like arts and law.
There's no question that making arts degrees and social work degrees more expensive is directly targeting the very industries that women are most attracted to. And you know, yes, of course, we need more women in STEM, but we really blatantly just saying men's work is what counts.
So, what's the solution? In the regional town of Mudgee, a path for young women in STEM is being forged by Dr. Puslednik at St Matthew's Catholic School, where her extracurricular science programs produce stunning results. Today, Dr. Puslednik is preparing a high tea for girls in Year 5 and 6.
We also have a discussion about, I guess, some of the courage it takes to actually pursue a career in STEM and science. Thank you. I think sometimes those traditional stereotypes take a little bit longer to change in some of our rural communities. So the more positive role models with that science, mathematics sort of background within a community, the more that I think those young women can see their future being in that area.
She looks a bit like a scientist.
So do you think that you would have this type of job, a job working in renewable energy when you're older?
I don't think so.
Why the trepidation?
I still want to be work the human body and stuff like that really fascinates me, so I want to do something in that kind of area. So yeah.
Dr. Puslednik's extracurricular efforts to curb STEM anxiety continue throughout high school.
We've been able to successfully develop a research mentor partnership with the University of Sydney. We have Year 10 students who we then teach them how to do statistics. We work on an issue that is very close to women.
What a breast cancer actually looks like.
Students involved in the project have travelled overseas to run real experiments with radiologists.
We wrote a paper about Vietnamese radiologists' efficacy in reading mammograms. So, you know, it's real research that helped us to see and be exposed to how science operates in a real world setting. Prior to that, maths was something that wasn't my main interest.
And the results speak for themselves.
So I would love to get to find a career in medicine, specifically oncology.
In fact, a 2020 study published by the Australian Journal of Education found that students who participated in the program had higher valid scores and reported greater confidence across 8 scientific skills than those who didn't. And the program helps out-of-field teachers overcome maths anxiety too.
Having the academic in the classroom with the teacher means that our teachers have been upskilled.
But the seeds of maths and money anxiety are planted at home too. So what can be done about that?
I remember when I was a kid,
I was really struggling with my maths and I was doing my homework on the kitchen table, and I said to my mum, I can't do it, I'm not good enough at it. And my mum, who's a really incredibly beautiful and insightful woman, she said, no, Terry, you can't do it yet. Just by adding that little word onto the end of the sentence, yet, I was reminded that my situation wasn't permanent.
But what can be done for girls who don't have that kind of support and grow up to be financially anxious?
We all grew up with some kind of a money story, and that money story has created certain beliefs that we hold and therefore equate to the universal truth. A very common belief that a lot of us hold is that money is scarce, and even though I have it right now, it won't be with me for long. For a lot of us, that belief comes either from deprivation in our own lives or parents who have lived through deprivation in their lifetimes.
In the Western Sydney suburb of Parramatta, Mari Muhammad is helping women unpack their ingrained financial beliefs through her workshop, Money Girl.
Hello, and welcome everybody. So, what we're gonna be doing is identifying our money story, because in order to change our money habits, we need to first address the money story that we grew up with.
So in my household, I would say that my parents are a little bit more frivolous in their money mindset. Their thinking is kind of, if you have money, what else do you do with it? If not to spend it.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. My mum came from an immigrant family and wanted to give us lots of opportunities. So by the time I had my first job, I was quite frivolous with my spending.
That is a belief that I learned from my mom as well. And I think that is also a response that our parents might have had to scarcity in their life growing up, is to then spend frivolously.
For me, it was very much about teaching myself financial responsibility and the importance of planning ahead.
It is important to realize what is the belief that I have internalized and whether it is still serving me well or whether it is time to let go.
But while young women can develop self-confidence in finance and STEM, the gender gap in these areas isn't a simple fix. Even if more women take on blue jobs, many will leave those industries because of the gender-based harassment they might face in male-dominated workplaces. And the pay gap between pink and blue jobs shows that we really need to value the types of work women are drawn to. So, what changes do we need so that workplaces value women's work just as much as men's?